The sound that filled the classroom was the irritating scratching of chalk on the blackboard, a noise that seemed to enter his ears and scratch Leo's brain from the inside. He felt the rough fabric of his sweater rubbing against his skin, each fiber a minor annoyance, a distraction. The fluorescent lights on the ceiling hummed, a high-pitched constant note that no one else seemed to notice. But to him, it was a scream. And then, all the noise stopped. The only sound was the voice of his teacher, Mrs. Albright, sharp as broken glass. "I've explained the equation 3 times, Leo. Look at me. Why can't you do something so simple? It's as if there's nothing in there. You're a dead weight in this room. Completely useless." The silence that followed was even worse. 30 pairs of eyes turned to him. Leo didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just cringed, as if he could disappear inside himself, and the hum of the lights seemed to get louder, drowning out the world. From what city? What place are you watching us now? Think for a moment about the safest place you know. Now imagine that place being violated. Stay until the end, because the call this family received not only changed their lives, but exposed the ignorance of everyone who judged them. Subscribe so you don't miss the outcome of this story, one that proves that a person's value is not in what they appear to be. Night was falling, and through the kitchen window, Anya Kowalski watched the snow begin to cover the street with a white, silent blanket. It was the same stillness she felt inside her own home, a stillness that once comforted her and now haunted her. She looked at her son, Leo, sitting on the living room rug. He wasn't playing with his toy cars like the other children. He was meticulously lining them up by color, size, and model, creating a perfect line that stretched from one end of the room to the other. Anyone looking in from the outside might think it was a quirk, a strange game, but Anya saw the wall he was building around himself, brick by brick, car by car. She remembered the early years, the relief of having such a calm baby. He never cried when he was hungry, never threw a tantrum over a toy. He just existed. At the playground, while the other mothers exchanged stories about their children's first words. "Mommy, Daddy," Anya smiled and said. Leo is a good listener, but inside, a knot tightened in her stomach. His silence was not peace. It was an abyss she tried to cross. Every day reaching out, calling his name, only to find emptiness on the other side. The nights were the worst. After her husband, Marek, went to bed, exhausted from his job at the factory, Anya sat down at the computer. The light from the screen illuminated her silent tears as she typed the same words over and over again on dozens of forums and medical websites. "My son doesn't talk. My son doesn't look me in the eyes. Signs of autism." Each click was a mixture of panic and desperate hope to find an answer, any answer other than the one her heart already feared. She felt like the worst mother in the world. What had she done wrong? Was it something during the pregnancy? Did she not love him enough? Not stimulate him in the right way? Guilt was a slow poison that consumed her day after day. She loved that boy with a ferocity that hurt, a love that seemed to have nowhere to go. As it bounced off the invisible wall he had built around himself, she saw the potential in his eyes, intelligence that shone through in rare moments, but she didn't know how to reach it. It was like having a treasure map written in a language she couldn't decipher. She didn't vent her feelings with words, but in the silence of her early mornings, in silent prayers that one day, just one day, her son would see her for who she really was. The journey for answers was a pilgrimage through sterile waiting rooms and well-meaning advice that sounded like sentences. The first specialist was an old, tired pediatrician who barely took his eyes off the papers. "It's just a phase, ma'am. Boys take longer. Be firmer with him." Anya and Marek left the office with a prescription for vitamins and a feeling that they had been dismissed, not helped. Their hope, fragile as it was, began to crack. Then came the child psychologist recommended by a cousin, a smiling woman with an office full of colorful toys. She suggested engagement therapies, which in practice meant forcing Leo to make eye contact and participate in games that made him visibly distressed. The result was the opposite of what was expected. Leo, who had previously been quiet, began to have meltdowns. He would scream, cover his ears, and rock back and forth. The psychologist called it resistance to treatment. Anya called it torture. False hope turned to despair. Every attempt to fix him seemed to only break him more. The external pressure was relentless. At Sunday lunches, Marek's family did not spare him their veiled criticism. "He needs more discipline," said his father-in-law. "In my day, a good spanking solved these problems." His sister-in-law, whose son was captain of the school soccer team, looked at Leo with a mixture of pity and superiority. "Maybe he needs more friends, Anya. Don't you isolate him too much?" Every word was a blow. They didn't see the daily struggle, the sleepless nights, the pain of watching her son suffer in a world that wasn't made for him. They only saw the problem, the piece that didn't fit into the puzzle of the perfect family. The pain this caused Anya was profound. She began to doubt her own instincts. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was an overprotective and incompetent mother. She distanced herself from her friends and stopped attending family gatherings. Leo's isolation became hers. The world became small, restricted to the four walls of her home. The only place where she didn't have to explain her son's silence, where she didn't feel the weight of judgmental stares. Her hope of finding help had faded, leaving behind a bitter feeling that she and Leo were alone against the world. The epicenter of the conflict was school. Mrs. Albright was not a bad person at heart. She was an overworked teacher with 30 students, very few resources, and no training in dealing with neurodiversity. To her, Leo was a frustrating enigma. He didn't respond, didn't participate, didn't fit into the lesson plan. The word useless wasn't born out of hatred, but out of professional despair, out of her own sense of failure at not being able to reach this student. She saw his behavior as a challenge to her authority, a deliberate refusal to learn, rather than a symptom of sensory overload and a mind that processed the world in a radically different way. The system had prepared her to teach, not to decipher, and in her failure, she blamed the child. At home, the conflict was quieter, but equally painful. Marek loved his son. Anya never doubted that, but his fear was greater than his understanding. He came from a culture where men were strong, providers, and raised their sons to be their mirrors. He looked at Leo and saw the antithesis of everything he hoped for. Denial was his shield. "There's nothing wrong with him, Anya," he would say almost every night. "He's just quiet. You read these things on the internet and put ideas in your head." Marek refused to accept the diagnosis of autism because to him, it was a label of failure, a failure of his as our father. He clung to the hope that one day Leo would wake up, pick up a ball, and play with him in the backyard. This denial drove a wedge between him and Anya. She needed a partner to fight alongside her, but she found a man who refused to go to war because admitting there was a war meant admitting that his son wasn't the soldier he had hoped he would be. And then there was society, the ever-present jury. A trip to the supermarket could turn into a battlefield. If Leo became overwhelmed by the lights and sounds and started rocking or making a low, continuous noise, the stares came from all sides. Disapproving, impatient looks, whispers of "bad kid," "no control." Anya felt every look as a physical assault. She wanted to scream, to explain that her son wasn't being rude, that he was in pain, that their world was too loud and aggressive for him. But she just hugged him, tried to calm him down, and left the store as quickly as possible, her heart broken and her dignity wounded. There were no villains with capes and evil laughter. There was only ignorance, fear of difference, the rush of a world that has no time for those who walk at their own pace. And that was the cruelest form of villainy. Change did not come with a bang, but with the soft creaking of the wheels of a book cart. Mrs. Albright, feeling guilty after the incident in the classroom, agreed with Anya's suggestion that Leo spend more time in the school library, a quieter place. And that's where the turning point came. The librarian was a woman about to retire, but it was a volunteer who came in twice a week who made the difference. Dr. Eva Rostova. She was a retired physics professor from the local university, a woman with curious eyes and seemingly endless patience. Eva didn't try to force Leo to read. She watched him. She saw that he wasn't interested in the stories, but in the very structure of the books. He didn't just stack them any old way, but created complex patterns of balance and symmetry. He organized them by color, creating perfect gradients on the shelves. One day, Eva saw him in the science section, mesmerized by a diagram of a jet engine. He wasn't reading the text. He was tracing the lines of the diagram with his finger, over and over again. The next day, Eva didn't bring a children's book. She brought a 1,000-piece puzzle of a nebula and a set of molecular models. She left them on a table in the corner and walked away. Leo approached, hesitant. He touched the puzzle pieces, feeling their shapes. Then he started putting it together, not by the edges like most people, but by clusters of colors and textures. In 3 days, the nebula was complete in its cosmic glory on the table. Ava was the first person not to ask, "What's wrong with him?" She wondered, "How does his mind work?" She began to communicate with him not through words but through systems, patterns, and logic. She brought him circuit diagrams, architectural plans, chess problems, and Leo blossomed. He didn't speak, but he responded, solving complex problems with a speed and intuition that were otherworldly. The turnaround was silent because it didn't involve a single spoken word. It was an act of translation. Eva Rostova learned to speak Leo's language, the language of silence, shapes, and patterns. And in doing so, she gave Anya the key she had been searching for to open the door to her son's world. With the bridge built by Dr. Rostova, Anya began to see her son with new eyes. Frustration gave way to fascination. Small victories began to accumulate, each one a priceless treasure. The first was when Anya came home and found a perfect replica of the Golden Gate Bridge in the living room, made with all the cutlery from the drawer. It wasn't a mess, it was engineering. She didn't fight. She sat on the floor and admired it. For the first time, Leo looked at her and pointed to the structure, a gleam of pride in his eyes. It was the first time he had shared an achievement with her. Marek also had his turning point. Skeptical, he watched Leo's play with stubborn suspicion, until one day he saw his son in the garage. Leo had taken an old toolbox and with screws, nuts, and small pieces of metal, was building something. Hours later, he showed it to Marek. It was a perfect miniature of the family car's engine, an engine Marek had spent the last weekend repairing. Leo had watched him work and memorized every part, every connection, just by observation. At that moment, Marek's shield of denial broke down. He didn't see a strange son. He saw a genius. He knelt down and, for the first time, instead of trying to pull Leo into his world, he entered his. "Can you show me how this part works?" he asked, pointing to one of the pieces. Leo took his father's hand and guided it, showing him the movement. It was the first real conversation between father and son. The victories continued. One day, while Anya was crying quietly in the kitchen after a difficult phone call, with the school, Leo approached her. He didn't say anything. He just took a handful of sugar cubes and built a small fortress around her hand on the table. It was a gesture of protection, of affection. It was his way of saying, "I'm here with you." Anya understood. His love didn't speak, but it manifested itself in structures, in patterns, in silent acts of overwhelming depth. Each small victory was a reminder that she wasn't trying to fix a broken son, but learning to appreciate a masterpiece. She didn't yet fully understand. She stopped lamenting the words he didn't say and began to celebrate the genius he displayed every day. One afternoon, Anya found a box of old photos. In one of them, a 3-year-old Leo stared blankly at the camera while she smiled, desperate to project an image of normal happiness. She remembered the woman she was back then, a frightened woman, full of guilt, who prayed every night that her son would wake up normal. She looked at that version of herself not with judgment, but with deep compassion. She didn't know then what she knows today. Her biggest mistake, she realized, wasn't a lack of love, but the direction of it. She tried to love the child she wanted him to be, not the child he was. She wanted him to fit into her world, a world of conversations, spontaneous hugs, and predictable social interactions. She was trying to teach Portuguese to someone who thought in binary code. The pain, the loneliness, the conflicts, all stemmed from this fundamental breakdown in communication. She wanted him to look at her, but she had never stopped to really look at him, at the universe that existed behind those silent eyes. The internal transformation was seismic. She stopped seeing autism as a disease to be cured and began to see it as the operating system of her son's mind. A different system, complex, but incredibly powerful. She understood that his silence was not empty, but full of calculations, patterns, and observations that most people would never notice. Her love changed. It ceased to be a love of repair and became a love of admiration. Accepting her son as he is was not resignation, but liberation. It freed her from guilt and expectation. It freed Leo from the pressure to be someone he wasn't. The journey had been brutal, but it had led her to a place of understanding so deep that it felt sacred. She didn't love her son despite his autism. She loved the totality of who he was, with autism being an intrinsic and fascinating part of his identity. Dr. Rostova, increasingly impressed by the complexity of Leo's creations, began photographing them, the diagrams he drew, the structures he built. Without much hope, she sent the images to a former colleague, a professor of systems engineering at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. She just wanted a second opinion on what she was seeing. 3 weeks later, the phone rang on a Tuesday evening. It was an unknown number from the United States. Anya answered, skeptical. On the other end of the line, a voice with an American accent introduced himself as Dr. Eris Thorne from MIT. He was calling about Dr. Rostova's emails. Ms. Kowalski, he said with excitement in his voice, the structures your son builds are not child's play. What he has done with dominoes is what we call cascading system simulations. The engine model, the precision is graduate level. We'd like to know, has he published any of this work? Anya was silent, the phone shaking in her hand. Publish? He was a 10-year-old boy whom his teacher had called useless in front of the entire class. She began to laugh, a laugh mixed with tears. She handed the phone to Marek, who listened, stunned, as the professor explained that his son's mind saw the world through complex and intuitive mathematics that they spent years trying to teach their best students. The call from MIT wasn't a magic wand that solved all his problems. Leo still had social difficulties. The world was still a noisy and scary place for him. But the call was validation. It was definitive proof that Anya was right. Her son's worth could not be measured by standardized tests or his ability to socialize. It was a silent and devastating revenge against every pitying glance, every ignorant piece of advice, every cruel word. It was the truth coming to light. The pain of the journey hadn't disappeared, but now they had tools. They had validation. They had a community of people who, instead of judging him, wanted to understand him. Hope was no longer a fragile fantasy, but a certainty built on the solid foundation of Leo's genius, finally recognized. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, it looked bright. Not every genius communicates with words, but every genius needs someone who knows how to listen to the silence. Leo's story teaches us that the most extraordinary minds often reside in the quietest worlds, waiting only for someone with the patience and wisdom to find the door. If this story touched you, if you've ever felt invisible or know someone who needs to be seen, like, comment, and subscribe. Sometimes our greatest help is simply sharing a story that says, you are not alone. Someone somewhere may need to hear that today.